Many old people worry about small problems, very small things: a light left on, a tap not fully closed, a bill placed in the wrong drawer. Things that younger people ignore, they notice. And not just notice, they think about them again and again. From the outside, this can feel confusing. Why worry so much about something so small? But inside, it is not small. As people grow older, their mind begins to change how it measures problems. It is not about size anymore. It is about impact. A small issue can lead to a bigger problem. A drop of water can become a leak. A missed call can become a missed need. So the mind starts connecting things. It starts thinking ahead. Not in a loud way, but in a quiet chain of what if. What if this becomes something bigger? What if I cannot handle it later? These thoughts are not panic. They are slow, but persistent. Now think about energy. In youth, people have the energy to fix problems quickly. If something goes wrong, they deal with it. But in old age, energy is limited. Even small problems require effort, so the mind tries to prevent them before they grow. Worry becomes a form of preparation, not because they want to worry, but because they want to avoid future strain. Now there is something deeper. Old people have lived long enough to see how small things can turn serious. They have experienced it. A small health issue that became something bigger. A small delay that caused a big inconvenience. So their mind remembers patterns, and it becomes cautious, very cautious. Now look at control again. As many parts of life become uncertain, small things become areas of control. They cannot control time. They cannot fully control health, but they can control small details. So they focus on them. A door, a light, a bill, a schedule. These things become important because they are manageable, and managing them gives a sense of stability. Now here is something very subtle. Memory changes with age, and when memory feels less reliable, the mind tries to compensate. It double-checks, it revisits, it rethinks. So a small issue does not get one thought, it gets many, because the mind is trying to be sure, trying not to miss anything. Now think about silence. Old people often have more quiet time, less distraction, less noise, so thoughts become clearer, and sometimes louder. A small concern does not get lost in activity. It stays, it repeats, it grows slightly in importance, not because it is big, but because it has space. Now there is also an emotional layer. Worry is sometimes a form of care. They worry about small things because they care about order, about safety, about not being a burden. They do not want small mistakes to create trouble for others, so they think ahead. They correct early. They stay alert. Now look at responsibility. Even in old age, many people still feel responsible for the house, for the family, for themselves. And responsibility does not reduce easily, so small problems feel like duties, things that should not be ignored. Now here is something deeper. The brain, with age, becomes more sensitive to negative possibilities, not because it is weak, but because it is experienced. It has seen loss. It has seen difficulty, so it becomes careful. It scans for what could go wrong. Even in small situations, this is not constant fear. It is quiet awareness. Now think about time again. Old people feel time differently. They know it is limited, so they value stability more. They want things to stay in order, so small disruptions feel bigger because they disturb that order. Now consider something very human. When life slows down, attention goes to details. Small things become visible, more noticeable, more present. So naturally, they receive more attention. Now there is also something about independence. Small problems can lead to dependence. If something breaks, if something is missed, they may need help. And needing help repeatedly can feel uncomfortable, so they try to prevent that. By worrying early, by thinking ahead, by staying careful. Now look at the emotional effect. This constant small worrying can create mental fatigue, not because the problems are big, but because they are frequent, one after another, and over time, this can make them feel slightly restless, even if nothing serious is happening. Now here is something very important. When someone tells them, "It's nothing, don't worry," it does not fully help, because for them, it is not nothing. It is something that could become more. So they do not need dismissal. They need understanding, a calm response, a sense that someone sees what they are trying to prevent. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. This is not about small problems. This is about how the mind adapts to aging, uncertainty, and experience. It becomes more careful, more detailed, more preventive. And these qualities show up in small things. So when an old person worries about something small, do not just look at the problem, look at the intention. They are trying to keep things stable, trying to avoid future stress, trying to stay in control of what they still can. And maybe this tells us something important, that what looks like overthinking from the outside is often over-caring from the inside, a quiet effort to keep life smooth, one small detail at a time. As this pattern continues, the mind slowly becomes trained to notice even the smallest shifts, a sound that is slightly different, an object not in its usual place, a routine that feels a little off. These things do not pass unnoticed anymore. They stay, they catch attention. And once attention is caught, the mind begins to circle around it, not in panic, but in repetition. Why is this like this? Did something change? Should I fix it now? This repetition is important to understand, because it is not just thinking. It is the mind trying to resolve something that feels incomplete. Old people become very sensitive to incomplete things, an unfinished task, a small uncertainty, a tiny doubt. These things stay open in their mind, and open loops create discomfort, so they try to close them, even if the issue is small. Now think about how the brain handles stress. In younger years, stress is often big and obvious. Work pressure, deadlines, responsibilities. But in old age, those big pressures reduce. And when big stress goes away, the mind does not become empty. It shifts. It begins to focus on smaller details. So the scale of concern changes, not because they want to worry, but because the mind is still active, still scanning, still trying to maintain order. Now, there is also something about predictability. Old people rely on patterns, daily habits, known routines, familiar setups. These patterns create comfort. So when something small breaks that pattern, it stands out immediately, even if it is not serious, because it disturbs the known flow, and disturbing the flow feels uncomfortable. Now here is something deeper. With age, recovery becomes slower, not just physical, mental as well. So even small disruptions feel heavier, because fixing them takes more effort than before. So the mind tries to prevent disruption before it grows, and prevention looks like worry. Now consider emotional memory. Old people remember past situations where small things led to bigger problems. Those memories may not be very clear, but the feeling stays. So when they see something small now, their mind quietly says, "Take care of it early." This is not fear, this is learned caution. Now think about independence again. Small problems can slowly reduce independence. If something is ignored, it may require help later. And asking for help repeatedly can feel uncomfortable. So they try to stay ahead. They think early, they act early, they worry early, because worrying early feels better than struggling later. Now there is also a connection with loneliness. When a person spends more time alone, their thoughts have more space. There is no distraction, no one to immediately say, "It's fine." So the mind processes everything internally, and internal processing often repeats. So a small issue gets more attention than it would in a busy environment. Now look at emotional sensitivity. Old people often feel things more deeply, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, internal way. So even a small issue can create a small emotional response, not strong, but steady, and steady feelings can stay longer. Now here is something very human. Many old people do not express these worries fully. They may mention them lightly, or not at all, but inside they are thinking, trying to organize things, trying to keep everything in place, because order gives peace. Now think about control again. Big things are no longer fully controllable. but small things are. So the mind holds on to them, gives them importance, because controlling small things creates a feeling of stability. Now look at the pattern. Notice, think, recheck, adjust, think again. This cycle becomes natural, not forced, just part of how their mind now works. And over time, this becomes their way of interacting with the world. Now here is something important for others to understand. When you say it's not a big deal, you are speaking from your perspective. But for them, it is not about size. It is about meaning, about what it could become, about what it represents. So instead of reducing it, it helps more to acknowledge it, to say, yes, I see it. That simple acknowledgement reduces their mental load. Now step back again. This behavior is not weakness. It is adaptation. A mind that has learned to value prevention over reaction, to value order over chaos, to value stability over risk. And these values show up in small, everyday concerns. So when an old person points out something small, do not just see the detail, see the intention behind it. They are trying to keep life smooth, trying to reduce future problems, trying to stay in control in a world that feels slightly less predictable. And maybe this shows something deeper about life, that in the end, it is often the small things that hold everything together. And those who have lived long enough begin to understand that very clearly. And in the later stage of this pattern, something very quiet begins to change. The worrying is still there, but the reason behind it becomes softer. It is no longer just about fixing problems. It becomes about holding things together. Their world is smaller now, fewer places, fewer people, fewer daily changes. So the small things inside that world become more important because they are what remain. A misplaced item, a small delay, a minor issue. These are not just events. They are part of the structure that keeps their day steady. And when that structure shifts, even slightly, it is felt more deeply. Now, here is something very subtle. Old people begin to link small problems with a sense of personal responsibility. If this is not right, maybe I missed something. So even a tiny issue can feel like a small personal failure, not in a harsh way, but in a quiet, internal way. And that feeling makes them return to it. Think about it again. Check it again. Correct it again. Not because the problem is big, but because they want things to be right. Now consider something deeper. As people age, they begin to value order more than speed. They are not trying to move fast. They are trying to keep things steady, and small problems disturb that steadiness. So they respond to them, carefully, repeatedly. Now there is also something emotional behind this. Many old people have spent years taking care of others, managing a home, handling responsibilities, keeping things in place. That role does not disappear easily, even when their situation changes. So their mind continues to operate in that same careful mode, watching, adjusting, preventing, and small problems become part of that role. Now think about attention. With fewer distractions, attention becomes sharper, more focused. So details that others miss become very clear to them. And once something is seen clearly, it is hard to ignore. So they return to it, again and again, until it feels settled. Now, here is something very human. Sometimes, worrying about small things is easier than facing bigger realities. Health changes, aging, loss. These are heavy thoughts, difficult to sit with. So the mind naturally moves towards smaller, manageable concerns. Things it can think about, things it can act on, because action brings relief. So small worries become a kind of emotional outlet, a way to stay engaged without feeling overwhelmed. Now look at the emotional effect again. Even though the problems are small, the feeling of wanting things to be right is strong. So when something is fixed, they feel a small sense of satisfaction, a quiet, okay. And that feeling matters. It gives a moment of mental rest. But soon, another small detail appears, and the cycle continues. Now here is something important. This does not mean they are unhappy. It means their mind is active in a different way. focused on maintaining balance, focused on keeping life smooth in their own way. Now think about how we respond. If we dismiss these small worries, they feel unseen. If we become irritated, they feel like a burden. But if we understand them, even quietly, they feel supported, and that reduces the intensity of their thinking. Now step back one last time. This behavior is not about small problems. It is about maintaining order, protecting stability, holding on to control, staying engaged with life. And all of this is expressed through small details. So when an old person worries about something that feels small to you, pause, look beyond the surface. They are not just reacting to that moment. They are responding to a lifetime of experience, to a mind that now works more carefully, to a heart that still wants things to be right. And maybe this shows something very simple, but very meaningful, that in the later years of life, it is not the big things that define daily peace. It is the small things being in place, the small things being right, the small things being settled. Because when those small things feel steady, the whole world, even if it is smaller now, feels a little more stable inside. And in the final stage of this pattern, something very gentle becomes clear. They are not really worrying about small problems anymore. They are using small problems to keep their world in order, to keep their mind engaged, to keep a sense of control alive. Because when many big things in life can no longer be shaped or changed, the small things become meaningful, not because they are big, but because they are manageable. Now look closely at what happens inside them. When they notice something small, their mind becomes active. It focuses, it organizes, it tries to fix. And in that process, they feel present. They feel involved in life. That feeling matters more than the problem itself, because staying mentally engaged is a quiet need in old age. So small worries become small tasks, and small tasks become a way to stay connected to daily life. Now here is something deeper. They begin to understand, slowly, that not everything needs to be perfect. But still, they like things to be in place. Not perfect, just settled. This is a softer form of control, not strict, not rigid, just a gentle preference for things to feel right. Now think about emotional balance. When big emotions are too heavy, the mind shifts towards smaller concerns. Because small concerns are easier to handle. They can be thought about, adjusted, resolved. So they create a kind of emotional rhythm, a flow of noticing and settling. And this rhythm keeps the mind from becoming empty or overwhelmed. Now consider something very human. Every person needs a sense of purpose. In youth, purpose often comes from big responsibilities, work, family, decisions. But in old age, those roles reduce. So purpose becomes quieter. It shows up in small acts, checking things, fixing things, noticing things. And worrying about small problems is often part of that. It is not just worry, it is involvement. Now here is something important to see. When everything around them slows down, these small concerns keep life moving. Even in a gentle way, they create activity, a reason to think, a reason to act, a reason to stay connected. Now think about peace again. True peace in old age is not the absence of all thoughts. It is the ability to live with thoughts without being overwhelmed. So even when small worries exist, they are held more softly. Less tension, more acceptance. This is how my mind works now, and that acceptance reduces inner conflict. Now step back and look at the full picture. What looks like worrying too much is actually a mix of care, attention, experience, adaptation, and a need for stability, all expressed through small details. So when an old person points out something small again, or thinks about it longer than expected, it is not because they are stuck. It is because they are still engaged, still aware, still trying to keep life steady in the way they understand best. And maybe there is something very meaningful in that even when life becomes quieter, people still find ways to stay connected to it, not through big actions, but through small, repeated moments of noticing, adjusting, and gently holding things together. Because in the end, It is often these small things that give structure to the day and quiet reassurance to the mind that everything in its own simple way is still okay.